It's interesting. You know, I've always seemed to have had a relationship with architecture. I mean, I have personally with my work, but architects have always really responded. And whenever I give sort of public lectures, it's always, you know, as many architects as there are artists there. You know, so that's great, and you know, it's great. You know, architects tell me that I've influenced them, and you know, and you see it around. Sometimes you see buildings and you think, oh, that looks quite similar to something I've done, which is fine. You know, that's the whole sort of purpose of art, really, to somehow sort of infiltrate back into culture or the larger sort of cultural scene. So, you know, I'm very flattered to have been chosen, you know, by a group of women, professional women that have respected and responded to what I do. I think a house is, you know, it's a good sort of starting point to talk about this because it was made to be up for a short period of time. That was partly out of naivety and not being able to think about having something there for a long time or working out how one could make that happen. But the particular house that I chose to cast had a short, you know, we worked with the council and we had like a short lease on using the land, and the house was to be demolished before even the sculpture was in it. You know, and of course all building projects go on longer than they're supposed to, and you know, in the end there was just 6 weeks where it was supposed to be up for, and we managed to double that time to 12 weeks. So it was up for, I think, 80 days all in all. It was standing. House was a work that caused an awful lot of controversy, but it also, you know, it talked about place, it talked about sculpture, it talked about things in the environment, and people really responded to it, whether it was negatively or positively, and it made this massive kind of furore at the time. And you know, and I'm very, very proud to have made it. You know, it's one of the things that I really feel most proud of making. You know, there were questions about it staying up for longer. People offered, you know, Charles Saatchi offered to move it to his gaff. You know, there was an offer to move it to Milton Keynes. But I was really particular that it had to stay there and it had to sort of finish its life there. But since I've made a lot of other work, some, you know, like the Holocaust Memorial or the Water Tower, which have been sort of site-specific, but the Water Tower was site-specific and then it was moved, which sort of felt okay because of the way the water towers are in New York, and they are sort of mobile structures in a way, and things that can be put up and taken down quite easily, in impermanent structures. But I've also been working on a group of works over the past 5 or 6 years, which I call shy sculptures, which are small buildings that I'm casting in concrete, which are then either made on site or brought back here and made here and then shipped back to where they were originally and sort of placed again. So, you know, I've just made one on Governor's Island in New York, which is opposite the Statue of Liberty, which is great, and I'm, you know, very proud to put that there, and it will stay there for a long, long time and grow in amongst a sort of wooded area that's been planted up. So, you know, really thinking about things in the long term. You know, it'll stay there throughout my lifetime, hopefully my children's lifetime and longer. There's another piece that I made on a fjord in Norway that gets sort of frozen into the lake. And another piece in Houghton Hall in Norfolk, you know, so, and 2 pieces in the desert in California. So sort of I'm trying to think about sort of putting pieces in places around the world, and eventually have this idea of making a kind of map or a book to, you know, and you might go on a sort of travel log to find them all. You know, it's always great to work with architects and do things with them and see things through their eye and their way of making things, but it's so laborious. And for me, I just find it like, oh God, you know, not another meeting, you know, how could, you know, because I just don't work like that. You know, I have a guy that I've worked with for years who is my assistant. He helps me make stuff away from my studio now. I just kind of nip backwards and forwards with that. Have a studio. I'm on my own in it most of the time, which I love. And, you know, I can switch on a computer and sort of look at things on it, but I certainly can't work all those programs. And actually looking at things in the way in which people do in the 21st century, it kind of makes me ill. I kind of get vertigo. You know, I can't look at buildings spinning and looking up and places that a human would never go, you know, but it's all about being able to do that. And of course you need to do it for the building and the engineering and all of those things. But it's, for me, it's just not how I work. I just don't think like that at all. Never have done, you know. Certainly Gordon Matta-Clark, I think as a student, I was very sort of taken by what he did, and loved the sort of scale of it and the sort of, you know, the way in which he sort of appropriated everything really. And yeah, I think you know, it's such a great shame that he died so young, because I think his sort of, you know, his legacy was great already. He would have made some really great work, or more great work. Yeah, so he was a big influence. I've recently made this large piece, which is going to be installed in the US Embassy, and in a way it's a sort of nod to Gordon Matta-Clark. It's based on a house very similar to the house that he, you know, the houses that he used, the sort of houses that were built from catalogues, and it's sort of to do with that. When I was a sort of very young artist, I made a piece called Ghost, which was the first sort of architectural piece that I made in a way. And I was surviving on nothing, and I think the piece cost about £4,000 to make, and I got a couple of small grants, and these grant applications you had to write what you know, what you were going to spend it on, what it was for, etc. And I said that I wanted to mummify the air in a room, and I think that's always been the case. You know, I think that's what, you know, in a way, just a way of sort of stopping time, of just making something, you know, kind of solid and clear, and you know, in a way, I suppose it's like marking time or doing something with materials that, you know, they're all the materials that I use are materials that solidify, you know, that, you know, it goes from a liquid and it changes state, becomes a solid. And, you know, I never use wood or, you know, things, kind of carving things. You know, going from very complex plastics and things like that to really basic materials like papier-mâché, which is what I'm sort of using at the moment. And, you know, I think it's always been about filling something up, or yeah, sort of holding space in some way. Yeah, when I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time in the British Museum, for example, you know, and you know, I think those sort of experiences of seeing, you know, of being inside a place with then these enormous things inside them, which you're then underneath or looking through. You know, this is before I'd been to kind of Egypt or Rome or whatever. So, you know, these really amazing historical structures that were then put inside the sort of 19th century buildings. You know, there's something about all of that which had always resonated with me, and yeah, I think it kind of stems from that. Well, drawing is something I've always done. You know, I started as a painter, and you know, I never really do representational drawings. I do things, you know, they're kind of straight from my mind. A lot of them are abstract. More recently, I've been making my own paper with papier-mâché and drawing on that. I use a lot of silver leaf, ink, you know, different types of paint. And I just play with things, really, and it's generally about, it's a kind of doodling activity, and it's often about freeing my mind, trying to find a place to find that creative space again for making sculpture. it can be about having started to make a sculpture and not quite sure where it's going, and then you sort of work it through with drawing. It's like a kind of conversation. And it's interesting because whenever I look at a drawing, I know it's like a diary of 30 years, and I can remember where I was when I made the drawing, and possibly how I was feeling, and that's sort of interesting in itself. And I will often draw the same thing over and over again, just changing it very, very slightly. And I do that a lot with sculpture as well. Those things are in series, and it's just about just tweaking something here and there. And it's not about making something better, it's just making something differently. It's very rare. I've lived in London all my life. It's very rare that I stand and look and really think about what a memorial is. And if somewhere like the Lutyens Memorial, which is the cenotaph, which is fantastic, but then there's the women's memorial just down 100 metres away, which is so clumsy and complex in comparison. And I don't know what I think about that. People that have lost their families and whatever in the war, of course they want a memorial. They want somewhere that they can go to and pay tribute. The memorial in Vienna, for example, had a very specific place. It's a pedestrian sort of area, which was, it had been a non-pedestrian area, so there's actually sort of a car park. But it's surrounded by these beautiful buildings, and it's really become a place where people go and think and, put candles there and stones there, and really use it in a very good way. And things like the Maya Lin Memorial, which is, that's a rather wonderful memorial in Washington. And cemeteries can be extraordinary memorials, and I just think it's often to try and put something into a city. It's not necessarily, it's right in the centre of a city. It's not necessarily the best place for them. And I think if you can make something that's sensitive and visible but not screaming, I think it's the best way to do it, personally.